Humanity had always believed that the stars were vast enough to keep their species safe. Colonies on distant planets, thriving trade routes, and peaceful exchanges with alien civilizations had created an optimistic view of the future. Earth was no longer the center of the universe, but instead, a part of a greater galactic community. However, all of that was about to change in an instant. It began on a quiet morning. The first indication of the Zorvax threat came not from a massive fleet or a battle, but from a simple signal, a transmission from deep space. At first, it was dismissed as a rogue signal, perhaps from a satellite or a forgotten probe. But within hours, scientists at Earth's most advanced space research center confirmed that the signal wasn't natural. It was intentional, and it was coming from a location far beyond human exploration, beyond any known colony or mapped star system. The message was blunt, incomprehensible at first. But as experts decoded it, the reality became terrifyingly clear. Surrender or perish. The Zorvax Empire demands your submission. All who resist will be eradicated. The Council of Earth's governments convened an emergency session. Panic swept through Earth's leaders. The Zorvax were an unknown species, but the warning they sent held a chilling weight. An empire that demanded submission or destruction. The question wasn't if humanity could fight back. It was whether humanity had the strength to survive. "What are we dealing with?" asked General Thomas Hayes, the leader of Earth's united forces. His voice echoed with a grim uncertainty as he stared at the holographic map of space displayed before the council. His team had been working around the clock, but the Zorvax seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. There were no warnings, no preliminary signals, just sudden, overwhelming power. Dr. Mara Saldana, a top scientist and the head of Earth's most prestigious interstellar research project, stepped forward, clutching a tablet. "We've been tracking their fleet's movement. They're not just coming for Earth. They're targeting the entire human race, every colony we've established in the past 50 years. Their ships are unlike anything we've ever seen. They're massive, covered in technology we've never encountered, and they show no signs of vulnerability." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation set in. Humanity's advanced technology, while impressive, was still relatively new, and the colonies had only begun to form meaningful defense systems. No one could match the might of an entire empire, especially one that had already shown their willingness to annihilate everything in their path. As the council debated whether to surrender or attempt to negotiate, a cold realization settled in. Earth was now in the crosshairs of a species far older and more powerful than they could imagine. Meanwhile, Commander Naomi Richards stood outside the council chambers, her eyes scanning the dark sky above. She wasn't involved in the political discussions. She was a military leader, trained for moments like these. She could feel the weight of the decision, the responsibility of what would come next. In her mind, there was only one option: fight. Commander Richards had been involved in the creation of the most secretive project in human history, the Hercules, a warship built not just for combat, but to turn the tide of a galactic war. The ship's design was rooted in advanced human and alien technology, incorporating everything from adaptive shielding to quantum-based weaponry. It had never been tested in a real battle, until now. Richards made her way to the launch bay, where the Hercules was waiting. As the heavy doors opened, revealing the massive silhouette of the warship, she knew what had to be done. The ship was their last hope, a weapon unlike any other. If Earth was to survive, it would be because of the Hercules. She stepped aboard, her crew already assembling, all handpicked for their expertise and courage. The mission was clear: go to the heart of the Zorvax fleet, face the unimaginable, and do whatever it took to protect humanity. The time for discussions had ended. The time for action had arrived. Humanity's fight for survival was about to begin. The moment Commander Naomi Richards boarded the Hercules, she could feel the weight of the ship's purpose pressing down on her. This wasn't just another mission. This was humanity's final stand. Everything the human race had worked toward, its colonies, Its future, its very survival, now rested in her hands. The Hercules was no ordinary vessel. It was a marvel of human ingenuity, a blend of cutting-edge technology and alien advancements never seen before. The ship's design was a closely guarded secret, even from the public. Hidden away in the lunar military complex, it had been built in total isolation from the world's prying eyes. Now, as Richard stood in the command center, she saw the culmination of years of research and development. The ship's sleek, jagged contours gleamed under the harsh lights, its enormous engines humming softly, as if ready to unleash its fury upon any enemy foolish enough to cross its path. Richards wasn't alone. Alongside her were some of the most brilliant minds humanity had ever produced. Chief Engineer Elena Vasquez was already at the engineering station, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls, ensuring that every system was running smoothly. Vasquez was the first to speak, her voice calm, but there was no mistaking the urgency in her words. "Commander, all systems are operational. The Hercules is ready for combat. We've integrated the advanced Zorvax tech we were able to reverse engineer from the skirmishes at Europa. We have the edge, but we'll need to use it wisely." Richards nodded, her sharp gaze focused on the tactical display before her. The rest of the crew was scattered across various stations, their faces etched with resolve. The Hercules wasn't just a warship, it was a lifeline for humanity. "We can't afford to make mistakes," she replied, her voice steady. "This is our one chance. We have to be ready for anything." Suddenly, the ship's eye, a sophisticated system named Athena, chimed in. "Commander, the Zorvax fleet is closing in. They will reach the outskirts of the Sol system in under 12 hours. The crew immediately went silent as the gravity of the situation settled over them. The Zorvax were relentless, and their speed was unmatched. Humanity had no time to waste. Richards turned to Lieutenant Marcus Darnell, her second in command, who was analyzing enemy movements on the main view screen. "We don't know what their full force looks like yet," Darnell said, his voice tight with tension. "But we know they're coming. We can't wait for them to get any closer. If we don't strike first, Earth and every colony are finished." Richards clenched her fists. There was no more time for indecision. She knew that the Hercules was their only hope, but it was untested in a real battle. They had simulated every possible scenario during training, but nothing could truly prepare them for the Zorvax's sheer force and technological superiority. She took a deep breath and turned back to the crew. "Prepare for launch. We leave immediately." As the Hercules lifted off from its hidden lunar base, the crew could feel the immense power of the ship's engines thrusting them into space. The vessel was designed to be stealthy, almost invisible to enemy detection. A part of the reason the Hercules had been created in secret was to ensure that humanity's final weapon wouldn't be detected before it could be deployed. Richard stood at the helm, watching as the moon's surface receded behind them. The ship's engines hummed with a quiet but undeniable power. She had no illusions about what lay ahead. The Zorvax fleet was an unrelenting, brutal force. They had already destroyed countless civilizations, and Earth was next on their list. The Hercules had to succeed, or humanity was doomed. As they traveled through the darkness of space, Commander Richards stood in front of the crew, her heart beating with both hope and fear. She had led soldiers into battle before, but this was different. This wasn't just about military strategy. It was about the future of every human being alive. "We fight not just for survival," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "but for the generations that will come after us. The Zorvax will learn that humanity doesn't surrender. We fight. We survive." The crew nodded, their eyes steely with determination. The Hercules was ready. The mission was clear. Their journey into the heart of the Zorvax fleet had begun. As the ship moved deeper into the void of space, Commander Richards allowed herself a single thought. No matter what happened next, humanity would never be the same again. The void of space stretched endlessly ahead as the Hercules cut through the darkness. The crew braced for the inevitable encounter with the Zorvax fleet. The atmosphere on board was tense, yet focused, each crew member performing their duties with precision, knowing the stakes were higher than ever before. Commander Naomi Richards stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Zorvax fleet was now only a few hours away. In those final moments before they arrived, Richards made a decision. They couldn't afford a direct confrontation, not yet. The Hercules was powerful, but facing an entire armada head-on would be suicide. Instead, she would do what humanity did best: adapt, improvise, and fight with cunning. "We have to outthink them," Richards muttered to herself. Her crew had been trained for conventional battles, but the Zorvax didn't fight like anything humanity had ever faced. Their ships were colossal, their weapons devastating, and their tactics unyielding. The only advantage humanity had was unpredictability. The Zorvax might be technologically superior, but they were still bound by their own limitations. "Commander," Lieutenant Marcus Darnell's voice broke into her thoughts. "We've detected the Zorvax fleet on our scanners. They're coming in fast. 4 capital ships and multiple smaller cruisers. It's a full assault." Richards exhaled slowly. The Zorvax weren't wasting time. "We can't engage them head-on. I want a series of hit-and-run tactics. Force them to underestimate us. We'll hit hard, then fade into the void before they can retaliate." Darnell raised an eyebrow. "You think we can outmaneuver them?" "We can," Richards said confidently. "We'll use our stealth capabilities to get close, then disable their smaller ships with precision strikes. We'll make them think we're just a ghost in the system, too unpredictable to hit. The bigger ships won't even know what hit them." Vasquez, the chief engineer, glanced up from her station. "The Hercules can cloak for short periods, but we'll need to be quick. Their sensors are sophisticated. We'll need a distraction to cover our movements." Richard's mind was already racing. "We'll use the drone swarm. Send them out in a scattered formation to create a false impression of multiple threats. While they're focused on that, we'll sneak in with the main ship. The drones can act as our decoy." The crew nodded, moving swiftly to carry out the plan. Richards could feel the tension build as the Hercules crept closer to the Zorvax fleet. The ship's engines hummed with anticipation as they prepared to activate the cloaking device. Every crew member was at their station, waiting for the first signal. "Ready to deploy the drones, Commander," Darnell reported, his fingers hovering over his controls. "We're in position." "Activate cloaking," Richards ordered, her voice low and steady. "And then launch the drones." The Hercules shimmered for a brief moment, then disappeared from the scanners. The crew held their breath as the warship silently drifted toward the enemy. The drone swarm launched next, scattering into the vastness of space. They were small, nimble, and unarmed, but they created a convincing illusion of multiple threats surrounding the Zorvax fleet. The Zorvax responded immediately, their cruisers firing at the drones in a flurry of energy beams. The Hercules remained hidden, its cloaking device making it virtually invisible to the Zorvax's sensors. As the Zorvax ships were distracted, Richards signaled for the next phase of the plan. "Now," she said. The Hercules dropped out of cloak, appearing just meters from one of the smaller Zorvax cruisers. The crew had mere seconds to act. Without hesitation, Richards ordered an immediate strike. "Fire the plasma cannons." "Full power," she commanded. The Hercules unleashed a devastating volley, sending the Zorvax cruiser into chaos. The plasma bolts tore through its shields, rupturing its hull with precision. In moments, the cruiser was disabled, its engines sputtering and weapons falling silent. Before the Zorvax could react, Richards gave the order to retreat. "Activate cloaking again. Get us out of here." The Hercules vanished back into the darkness of space, leaving the Zorvax fleet bewildered and scrambling to respond. The drone swarm continued its chaotic path, misleading the Zorvax into thinking the Hercules had flowed into another direction. Richards watched as the Zorvax fleet tried to regroup. They were rattled, but they wouldn't be fooled for long. However, the first strike had been a success. Humanity had sent a clear message. They weren't going down without a fight. That was too close, Vasquez muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. But it worked. For now. Richards allowed herself a brief, tight smile. It worked. But this was just the beginning. Now, they'll know we're here, and they'll come after us with everything they have. Darnell looked at her, a sense of quiet respect in his eyes. They're underestimating us, Commander, but we're just getting started. Exactly, Richards replied. Now we make them regret ever challenging humanity. The Hercules drifted through space, its cloaking device keeping it hidden from the ever-vigilant eyes of the Zorvax fleet. The crew was shaken, but they were alive. And for now, that was enough. The damage to the Zorvax cruiser had sent shockwaves through their ranks, but Richards knew better than to believe that would be the end of it. The Zorvax would adapt quickly, and humanity's only hope of survival rested in one simple truth: innovation. The Hercules had been built not just to fight, but to evolve on the battlefield. In the war room, Commander Richards stood before a holographic map of the Zorvax fleet, her brow furrowed in concentration. The Zorvax had taken the bait once, but they wouldn't be fooled again. They were ruthless, relentless, and their next move would be far more calculated. It was time to take the fight to them in a way they could never expect. Dr. Saldana, what do we know about their genetic research? Richards asked, glancing at the scientist who had become one of her closest allies in this fight. Dr. Mara Saldana, the head of Earth's genetics division, stepped forward. The Zorvax aren't just interested in conquering us. They're looking to use humanity's DNA to save themselves. We discovered that their species is dying. Their biology is deteriorating at an alarming rate. The Zorvax believe that by integrating human genetics into their own, they can regain strength and extend their lifespan. The revelation sent a chill down Richard's spine. Humanity wasn't just fighting for its own survival. They were now the target of a biological weapon of sorts. The Zorvax were desperate, willing to risk everything to alter their genetics with human DNA. The implications were profound, but Richards knew one thing for certain. If they succeeded, it would mean the end of humanity as it knew it. So they're using us as a resource, a tool to save their dying species, Richards said, her voice low with disgust. That's why they're hunting us. Every colony, every city they encounter, they're looking for our genetic material. We can't let them succeed, Dr. Saldana replied, her voice urgent. If they can replicate our DNA, it would make them stronger, smarter, more resilient. They'd become an unstoppable force. Richards paced, her mind racing. The Hercules wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon, but it could be so much more. We can turn their own tactics against them. We need to develop a countermeasure, something that will neutralize their genetic research. If we can disrupt their ability to integrate human DNA, it will cripple their entire strategy. Vasquez, who had been quietly listening, looked up. If we can hijack their genetic data streams, we might be able to interfere with their genetic modifications, but that would require getting into their core systems. We'd need to infiltrate one of their ships, preferably a flagship, and plant a virus that targets their biological data. A quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the crew. Richards could see the determination in their eyes. They knew what this mission would entail. It would require daring, stealth, and a whole lot of luck. But there was no choice. The Zorvax were close to achieving their goal, and the Hercules had to stop them before it was too late. We can't just destroy them, Richards said, her voice firm. We need to dismantle their ability to use us as a weapon. We take the fight to their most powerful ship, the Dreadnought. If we can get aboard and disrupt their genetic operations, it could cripple their entire invasion. Vasquez nodded, adjusting her glasses. It's risky. The Dreadnought is heavily guarded, and it's armed with more firepower than any ship we faced. But if we can infiltrate it, I think we can plant the virus and neutralize their genetic systems before they can make any further progress. Richards felt the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. This wasn't just about combat anymore. This was about survival in its purest form. Humanity wasn't fighting for victory alone. They were fighting for their very identity. If the Zorvacs succeeded in altering their biology, humanity would lose what made them unique. "Prepare the Hercules for a boarding operation," Richards ordered, her voice resolute. "We'll hit them where it hurts. Vasquez, you and your team will work on the virus. Darnell, I need you to coordinate with the tactical team. This will be a two-pronged operation. We'll need to split their attention, create chaos, and buy ourselves time to breach their systems." The crew moved quickly, each member knowing their role in this high-stakes operation. Richard stood for a moment, watching as the crew prepared for the dangerous mission ahead. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility that rested on her shoulders, but she also felt something else: determination. The Hercules was humanity's last hope. This mission wasn't just about stopping the Zorvacs. It was about proving that human ingenuity, the will to fight, and the refusal to surrender were forces stronger than any enemy, no matter how technologically advanced. And as the Hercules set course for the heart of the Zorvacs fleet, Commander Richards knew one thing for certain: they would give everything to protect their future. "Let's finish this," she muttered under her breath. The fate of humanity rested in their hands. The Hercules hurtled through the dark expanse of space, its cloaking device activated as it neared the Zorvacs dreadnought, the flagship of their fleet. The ship loomed like a monstrous shadow against the backdrop of distant stars, its size dwarfing the Hercules and every other vessel in the Zorvacs armada. It was a fortress in space, fortified with shields, weapons, and an impenetrable defense system. But Commander Naomi Richards knew the key to success wasn't brute strength. It was subtlety, strategy, and timing. She stood in the command center, the crew all on edge, knowing what was at stake. "Darnell," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "give me a tactical readout. We need to know their weak points." Lieutenant Marcus Darnell tapped the console before him, bringing up the dreadnought's schematics. The ship's hull is reinforced with anti-gravity shielding, but there's a blind spot in their upper starboard quarter. They rely on drone patrols for security, but we can slip past them using the Hercules stealth mode. We'll need to get in close and breach their outer hull before they realize we're here. Richards nodded. The timing had to be perfect. "We've only got one shot at this. We're going to use that blind spot. Once we're inside, we need to move fast." "Vasquez, is the virus ready?" Chief Engineer Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her face drawn with the weight of the operation. "It's ready. We've designed the virus to target their genetic systems specifically. It'll scramble their attempts to modify any DNA they collect and prevent them from using it to alter their species. But once we plant it, we'll need to extract immediately. We won't have much time before their systems lock down." Richards's heart raced. There was no room for error. "Let's make sure there are no surprises. Once we breach, we move as a team. Stick to the plan." The crew nodded in unison. They had trained for this moment, but nothing could prepare them for what lay ahead. With the virus secured, the Hercules approached the dreadnought's weak point, the blind spot on its upper starboard side. The vastness of the Zorvac ship was almost overwhelming. The Hercules was small in comparison, barely a blip in the vast, cold emptiness of space. Yet it was also humanity's last hope. Stealth mode activated. "We're within range," Darnell reported, his voice steady. "Initiating breach sequence." The Hercules crept closer, cloaked and silent. Every heart on board seemed to beat in synchrony as Richards gave the order to breach. The ship's hull, reinforced with advanced alloys and energy shields, wasn't going to be easy to penetrate, but the Hercules had been equipped with the tools to handle it. "Deploying cutting charges now," Vasquez called out. A burst of energy crackled through the ship's systems as a cutting beam sliced through the dreadnought's reinforced outer layer. Sparks flared as the massive doors of the breach opened. For a few seconds, the crew held their breath. The Zorvacs had no idea what was coming. "Breach successful," Darnell said with a tight grin. We're in. The crew quickly moved into action, leaving the Hercules command center behind and stepping onto the dreadnought's inner decks. The air was dense and oppressive, and the metallic corridors of the Zorvac ship seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. This was the heart of the Zorvac's empire, a place where their most advanced research was conducted, where humanity's genetic legacy was being exploited for their own gain. Richards led the team, their footsteps echoing down the darkened hallways. The virus was safely secured in Vasquez's hands, but Richards knew that they would need to move fast. The longer they lingered, the higher the risk of detection. They had a narrow window of time before the Zorvacs would realize they had breached their vessel and lockdown would ensue. "Stay sharp," Richards ordered. "Darnell, take point. Vasquez, follow me. We're heading for their main data core. It's our only chance to disable their genetic modification systems." The crew split into their assigned positions, moving swiftly through the labyrinthine corridors. The dreadnought was massive, but it was also eerily silent. There were no guards in sight, only the faint hum of machinery and the occasional whirring of the ship's internal systems. The Zorvacs, it seemed, were still unaware of their presence. As they approached the core chamber, the tension grew palpable. Richard's hand tightened on her weapon, prepared for anything. A sudden shift in the air, a sharp noise, and then, "Contact," Darnell shouted, spinning to face the approaching enemy. From the shadows, a small group of Zorvac soldiers emerged, their alien features cold and merciless. They were heavily armored and armed, their weapons crackling with lethal energy. The moment of silence shattered as gunfire rang out, but Richards didn't flinch. They were ready. They had trained for this. The battle had begun. "Get to the core," Richards shouted. "Move, move." As the crew fought fiercely to hold off the Zorvac soldiers, time seemed to slow. They had to complete their mission, no matter what. The virus had to be planted before the ship locked down, before the Zorvacs could stop them. "Move," Richards urged again, her voice cutting through the chaos. The clock was ticking, and the fight for humanity's survival was only just beginning. The sounds of battle echoed through the cold, metallic halls of the Zorvac's dreadnought as Commander Naomi Richards and her team fought their way through the enemy. The Zorvac soldiers were formidable, their movements swift and coordinated, but the humans aboard the Hercules weren't about to be overpowered so easily. Each crew member fought with the raw, unrelenting determination of those who had everything to lose. Richards crouched behind a pillar, her pulse pounding in her ears as she aimed her weapon at a Zorvac soldier who was attempting to flank their position. She squeezed the trigger, and the soldier fell to the floor in a heap, its unnatural insectoid body twitching before going still. "Clear," Lieutenant Marcus Darnell called out, his voice crisp over the comms. His team had already neutralized 2 of the remaining Zorvac soldiers, but there were still more of them lurking in the corridors, waiting to pounce. "Vasquez, are you ready?" Richards asked, her voice tight with urgency. Chief Engineer Elena Vasquez, who had been meticulously preparing the virus for insertion into the dreadnought's data core, nodded grimly. "I'm at the terminal now, Commander. Just a few more seconds, and I'll be in." The clock was ticking down rapidly. Every passing moment brought the Zorvacs closer to realizing that they had breached their flagship. It wouldn't be long before the dreadnought's security systems locked down completely, trapping the team inside. Richards could feel the pressure mounting, but there was no time to hesitate. The fate of humanity, and the Zorvacs' plans to modify their species with human DNA, hinged on the success of this mission. "Get it done, Vasquez," Richards ordered. "We don't have much time." Vasquez's fingers flew across the interface of the Zorvacs' main terminal. The virus they had developed was no simple piece of code. It had been designed to specifically target the Zorvacs' genetic modification systems, shutting them down from the inside out. If they were successful, it would cripple the Zorvacs' ability to alter human DNA, and the entire fleet would be left vulnerable. But the virus wouldn't work unless they could access the dreadnought's mainframe. And right now, That was becoming more difficult by the second. "Damn it, the system is fighting me," Vasquez muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. "They've triggered a secondary security protocol. I'm going to need more time." Richards glanced at the door leading into the core chamber. They were close. Too close to fail. She felt a deep, gut-wrenching sense of urgency. The Zorvax soldiers would be back at any moment, and the longer they stayed here, the more likely they were to be surrounded. "How much time?" Richards asked, not daring to look away from the hallway, as she kept an eye out for any incoming threats. Vasquez's hands shook slightly as she continued to work. 30 seconds, Commander, maybe less. I'm bypassing their fail-safes as quickly as I can." Richards nodded, her eyes narrowing with resolve. "Darnell, keep us covered. We need to hold this position until Vasquez finishes." The battle raged on as Darnell and the others pushed forward to protect their engineer. Richards stayed alert, her weapon raised, ready for anything. Every time a Zorvax soldier fell, another seemed to take its place, but the Hercules crew was relentless. They weren't about to let humanity's last hope slip through their fingers. 20 seconds, Vasquez called out, her voice more strained now. "This is it. The virus will either work, or we'll be dead before it even has a chance." Richards felt the weight of those words like a physical blow. The success of the mission was no longer guaranteed, and the entire team knew that they were walking a razor's edge. If the virus didn't work, the Zorvax would have access to their DNA within minutes. It could mean the end of humanity's identity, and their species itself. "Stay focused," Richards said, her voice firm. "We're making it out of here. We fight for our future." Vasquez's face was pale with the strain of overriding the Zorvax's defenses, but she didn't falter. She had to succeed. There was no other choice. 10 seconds, Vasquez said. Her fingers moved faster, frantically trying to finish the operation. Sweat dripped down her temples as the strain of the task seemed to weigh on her. Outside the core chamber, the sound of Zorvax footsteps grew louder. Richards could hear them closing in, their harsh, guttural voices echoing through the halls. They were almost out of time. 5 seconds, Vasquez said, her voice now barely a whisper. Almost there. The team was ready. Richards looked at Darnell, who nodded in response. They would fight their way through, no matter the cost. "Now," Vasquez shouted. In an instant, the terminal flashed bright green. Then the entire dreadnought's systems flickered. The virus had been successfully planted. "We've done it," Vasquez exclaimed, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The dreadnought systems began to fail, its genetic modification systems short-circuiting as the virus spread like wildfire through their systems. The Zorvax had lost their ability to alter human DNA, their most dangerous weapon rendered useless. The crew of the Hercules had struck at the heart of the Zorvax threat, and won. But the battle was far from over. The Zorvax would retaliate. They always did. "Fall back," Richards shouted. "We need to get out of here now." The crew quickly regrouped and made their way toward the breach point, knowing the fight wasn't over. They had won this round, but the war was far from finished. The clock was ticking. And now, the Zorvax knew that humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The hum of the Zorvax dreadnought systems began to change. What had once been a smooth, ominous buzz now pulsed erratically, a sign that the virus had done its job. The dreadnought's power systems flickered and buzzed. For a brief moment, it was silent, eerily so, before alarms blared throughout the ship, signaling that the ship's internal defenses had been compromised. "We've triggered their lockdown," Vasquez said, her voice strained as she looked up from her terminal. "We have minutes, maybe less, before they seal the whole ship." Richards cursed under her breath. The virus had worked, disabling the Zorvax's ability to alter human DNA, but it had also activated every security measure they had in place. The team had achieved their mission, but now they had to escape before the Zorvax retaliated. The ticking clock felt like a countdown to death. "Darnell, secure the exit route," Richards ordered. Vasquez, grab the virus module. We're not leaving anything behind. The crew moved swiftly, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The sound of distant Zorvak's footsteps was growing louder. Reinforcements were on the way. Richards could feel the pressure mounting as her heart pounded in her chest. The team had no choice but to fight their way back out. The dreadnought was a labyrinth, and every turn could lead to another ambush. "Commander, we've got company," Darnell reported, his voice calm but urgent. He was already peering around a corner, his weapon raised in anticipation. "At least 3 squads inbound. Hold them off as long as you can," Richards ordered, her mind calculating their next move. "We can't afford to be surrounded. Everyone, stay together." The crew kept moving, their guns raised, ready for whatever the Zorvaks threw at them. They needed to reach the breach point, but it wasn't going to be easy. With every passing second, the dreadnought seemed to come alive with more activity, more Zorvaks forces pouring in from all directions. The first Zorvak soldier appeared around the corner, his weapons raised. Darnell fired without hesitation, sending the soldier crashing to the ground. But the enemy was relentless. More appeared, their dark forms charging toward the team. The hallways seemed to shrink with every step, their every move shadowed by the enemy's approach. Richards took a deep breath and fired, the blast from her weapon striking the advancing Zorvaks and forcing them back. Darnell, Vasquez, cover the rear. We're not slowing down. They moved in perfect synchrony, a well-oiled machine. Darnell's weapon cracked with deadly precision, while Vasquez aimed her gun with the calm of someone who had trained for this moment. The crew cut down Zorvak soldiers one by one, but there were too many of them. The dreadnought was waking up, and it was fighting back with everything it had. "Commander," Vasquez shouted, her eyes wide with alarm. "The breach is closing. They're locking down the entire sector." Richards's blood ran cold. They couldn't be trapped on the dreadnought. Not now, not when they were so close to escaping. "We need to get there now," she shouted. With the Zorvaks closing in, Richards made a snap decision. Fall back to the secondary exit route. It's farther, but it might be the only way out. The team turned on their heels, running down a side corridor. The sounds of Zorvak's forces grew louder with every passing second. They were out of time, but Richards wasn't about to give up. Humanity's future rested in their hands, and they would fight every step of the way to preserve it. As they sprinted through the winding halls of the dreadnought, Richards felt the weight of the moment press down on her. This mission had been a gamble, daring, dangerous, and nearly suicidal, but humanity had pulled it off. They had struck a blow against the Zorvaks that would be remembered for generations. "Almost there," Darnell yelled from the front. The exit was in sight, a service hatch leading out to the Hercules. But the Zorvaks weren't far behind. The pounding of their footsteps echoed off the walls, signaling their arrival. Richards's heart raced. They couldn't afford to be caught now. "Go, go, go," she shouted, pushing her team forward. As the crew neared the hatch, a squad of Zorvak soldiers appeared in the corridor ahead of them, their weapons raised. It was a blockade. If they didn't act fast, they would be surrounded. Richards didn't hesitate. She fired first, the energy blasts tearing through the Zorvak soldiers with deadly accuracy. But more kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. The Hercules was just beyond their reach, but getting there would take everything they had. "Vasquez, get to the hatch," Richards ordered. "We'll cover you." Vasquez nodded and sprinted toward the hatch. Darnell and Richards continued to lay down cover fire, each shot more desperate than the last. The Zorvaks were relentless, but so were they. With a final push, Vasquez reached the hatch and hit the emergency override. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the Hercules just beyond. "Get inside," Richards yelled. One by one, the team scrambled into the Hercules, but not before Richards fired one last shot. The door slammed shut behind her, and the ship's engines roared to life. As the Hercules began to pull away, Richards glanced back at the dreadnought. still looming like a dark giant in the void of space. The battle wasn't over, but humanity had struck a powerful blow. The Zorvax would not have humanity's DNA. They had failed. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Richards allowed herself a breath of relief. But only for a moment. There was much more to do. The war had only just begun. The Hercules surged through the vacuum of space, its engines blazing as it retreated from the Zorvax dreadnought. The crew was battered, weary, and bloodied, but their mission had succeeded. Humanity had delivered a powerful blow against the Zorvax, crippling their ability to manipulate human genetics. But Commander Naomi Richards knew that the battle was far from over. The Zorvax were relentless. They would regroup, adapt, and come after them with even more force. Richards stood at the command deck, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. The Hercules was far from safe. The Zorvax were now aware of humanity's capabilities, and they would come with everything they had. The war was no longer about survival alone. It was about ensuring that humanity's future remained in its own hands. The sound of footsteps broke her concentration. Lieutenant Darnell stepped up beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion but also determination. "Commander," he began, his voice steady, "we've pulled off something they never saw coming. But we know they won't just let it go. The Zorvax are going to retaliate." Richards nodded. "I know. We've disrupted their plans, but we've only scratched the surface. We've damaged their genetic operations, but they'll find another way to try and conquer us. We've made a powerful enemy." Dr. Vasquez, now seated at the engineering station, looked up from her console. "We've also learned something invaluable. The Zorvax, as ruthless as they are desperate. They're willing to change their biology, to sacrifice their identity, just to survive. That means they don't have a backup plan. If we can continue to hit them where it hurts, they'll be forced to retreat." Richards considered her words. Vasquez was right. The Zorvax were not just invaders. They were a dying race, trying to save themselves through manipulation of other species. Humanity was not just a victim. They were a weapon in a larger cosmic struggle for survival. If humanity could capitalize on their desperation, they might actually turn the tide of the war. "We can't let up now," Richards said, her voice firm. "We need to keep the pressure on. We strike at their supply lines, their command centers, their fleets. The more we destabilize them, the more they'll hesitate to launch another all-out offensive. If we break their confidence, we might force them into a retreat." Darnell leaned in, his brow furrowed. "We'll need allies. We've seen how fast the Zorvax can mobilize, and we're one ship in a vast galaxy. If we want to continue hitting them where it hurts, we need support. Other human colonies, resistance groups, maybe even some neutral factions." Richards turned toward him, her gaze sharp. "And we'll find them. We have to. If we fight alone, we'll be overwhelmed. But together, we stand a chance." Vasquez spoke up, her eyes focused on the console before her. "I've been looking at the data we gathered from the Dreadnought. I think we can develop a more sophisticated version of the virus, one that not only disables their genetic systems, but also disrupts their technology. We can slow their advance, hit their fleets hard, and maybe even turn some of their weapons against them." Richards nodded approvingly. "That's our next step. We need to be ahead of them at every turn, but we can't do it alone." The crew fell into a moment of quiet contemplation. The Hercules was the only ship capable of executing such daring missions, but without resources, without allies, it wouldn't be enough. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was only a small part of it. The Zorvax had their sights set on the entire species, and they would never stop until humanity was completely eradicated or subjugated. "We'll begin by reaching out to the other colonies," Richards said. "There's a network of resistance cells across the galaxy. Some of them are small, some are well established, but they all have one thing in common. They hate the Zorvax. If we can convince them to join our cause, we'll have a fighting chance." Darnell smiled, the fire of determination returning to his eyes. I've always believed humanity's strength lies in our unity. If we can show them that, maybe we can rally a force that can truly challenge the Zorvax. Richards looked out at the endless stars. Then let's make them understand. We are not just fighting for survival anymore. We are fighting for our future, for the future of every human who has ever lived. If we stand together, there's nothing the Zorvax can do to stop us. The team was already moving, strategizing their next steps. The Hercules wasn't just a ship anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance, a beacon for every colony, every resistance cell, and every human who refused to bow down. They had proven that humanity could fight back, that the Zorvax might be technologically superior, but they lacked the one thing humanity possessed in abundance, an indomitable will to survive and adapt. As the crew worked to prepare the next phase of their mission, Richards felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had won a crucial victory, but the real war was just beginning. This was only the start of humanity's resistance. The Zorvax had underestimated humanity once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. But the Hercules and its crew would be ready, every step of the way. The war for humanity's future was far from over, but Commander Naomi Richards knew this. No matter how dark the road ahead, humanity would rise, and they would fight with everything they had. "We're not done yet," Richards muttered to herself, watching the stars race by. "Not even close."